Hi, it's Simon here from Analog Anorak. It's been a challenging year for me so far, so I've decided to put back a couple of ambitious projects and go for a simpler one that I actually started work on a couple of years ago. As Emil Berliner Studios are currently mastering and cutting several Decca records using original source principles, it seems a topical time to share with you 7 highlights from a curious series released by Polygram, where the shoe was most definitely on the other foot. And Decca unintentionally produced a kind of 80s distant ancestor of original source records. Between 1983 and 85, Decca's classical mastering and cutting team in London mastered and cut around 20 Deutsche Grammophon titles as part of a series called The Great Composers and Their Music. These were released as a magazine and record package once a fortnight, with each issue devoted to a different composer. The publishers, Marshall Cavendish, collaborated with Polygram and so had access to the Deutsche Grammophon, Decca and Philips archives for the actual records. The publishers put these out in English, French and German language versions, but it's only the records that came with the English language versions that have this unique all Decca special ingredient. The French and German language versions are just pretty normal in that they used the standard European Polygram manufacturing chains, which means that, for instance, the Deutsche Grammophon records continue to be cut in Germany, and the Philips ones in Barn, and then they would be pressed more locally. There's next to no information available about this series, which really went under the radar. And despite my best efforts, I've been unable really to pin down why all 64 titles were mastered and cut in West Hampstead. Rob Davison from MadeInWalthamstow.com kindly did go through his Polygram records and was able to confirm that all of the English records were pressed at Walthamstow, but he didn't find anything to explain these rather unusual arrangements. I came across a sizable chunk of Great Composers vinyl around 2 years ago in a charity shop, and basically they just wanted to make some space again, so I was able to get hold of quite a lot of these records for between about £1 and £3 each. It was particularly after I'd read the dead wax and saw that there was something unusual going on with these records that I got particularly interested in these records, and no prizes for guessing, it was the Deutsche Grammophon titles that I really wanted to get as many of as possible. This wasn't just for the novelty factor of having a little collection of Ted Burkett pressed Deutsche Grammophon records. It was also to find out if any of these records sounded more interesting and engaging than the standard DG vinyl fare from this period. What I found out from the dead wax was that the actual mastering engineers from Decca used on this project were the same ones who were used with the late Polygram era Jubilee pressings. So we do know that the engineers were Ted Burkett, Quentin Williams, but also the mysterious Mr. X, who I'm afraid still I haven't been able to identify. In some ways what we've got here with the DG titles is a sort of Jubilee Records special edition Deutsche Grammophon version with similar sounding qualities for the sonics, but also, as you find with the Jubilee series, occasionally you do get some really good standout recordings that punch well above their weight. It seems very likely that when Decca got hold of these tapes, that they didn't do anything special. They just used the similar old school techniques that they used with the Decca tapes for cutting Decca records. So there's certainly nothing as special as Rainer Maillard's bespoke cutting equipment and techniques, and no inky black, quiet, premium vinyl either. But what they do seem to share is just that great, simple philosophy where the mastering engineers were allowed to approach each individual job as artisans. And this was a refreshing alternative to the dark days from the mid-70s onwards, where the cutting engineers at Deutsche Grammophon basically had to act like lab technicians, following safe, standardized criteria and specifications, ensuring that vinyl was cut in the safest, most underwhelming way consistently around the globe. With original source records being around for a few years, we have kind of got used to their signature qualities, which include often this quite powerful, visceral grunt to the sonics. If, like me, you're partial to a bit of that every now and then, and wanted to know if there was anything in this series, there is one title that immediately jumps out as a possible contender. And it's this one. Leonard Bernstein conducting the Met with a single disc highlights version of Bizet's Carmen. This was one of the last titles I got hold of, and I was really quite surprised when I dropped the needle on this one. It sounds big, brash, and beautiful. I suspect the reason why it sounds a bit like an original source recording with that powerful signature grunt is probably down to the performance that Bernstein managed to eke out from the cast and the orchestra. But there is one other possible reason, and that's because this comes from the early 70s era of 4-channel recording techniques. This one was done around 1973. It's got the powerhouse combo of Thomas Maury, producer, and the distinctive engineering style of Gunther Hermanns. You also get for this cutting probably the perfect Decca engineer. With over 20 years of experience cutting opera for Decca, it's the G-man himself, Ted Burkett. His accumulated expertise results in 2 sensational sides that are strong on dynamics, but on transparency too. Side 1 is an absolute triumph, with some jaw-dropping sonic moments and most of the hits too. It's certainly possible in the future that Bernstein's Carmen will get the original source treatment, probably the complete version, which will probably come on 3 to 4 discs in a lovely box set, well over £100. But in the meantime, if like me, you're lucky enough to just come across a nice copy of this record for £1, just get it. It's a no-brainer. It really is very good. Record number 2 also came from an early 70s 4-track recording session. And it's another impressive stunner from the Maury-Hermann stable. It's a Michael Tilson Thomas recording from quite soon after he burst on the scene with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The Tilson Thomas version of Rite of Spring has been described as Boston's definitive recorded Rite of Spring. There's plenty to relish here. For me, I love the primeval dawn chorus at the beginning of the piece, followed by a performance that's so incredibly tight and precisely timed, like some kind of luxury modernist swish swatch. I don't think this pressing is as good as the Bernstein. It's not got that level of transparency, but it has got powerful, rock-solid dynamics. As far as tape sources, my guess is for records 1 and 2, the Decca were probably given by DG some 70s era tapes, which were 4-track to 2-track mixdowns with a fixed microphone room level to work from. The Great Composers version was one that was pressed by Mr. X. I'm afraid I haven't made any progress identifying him since I made the Jubilee video. The results he got with this Rite of Spring do remind me of another cut he did around this period with similar celebrated dynamics. And it's this one, the London Enterprise of Meta conducting Varese's Arcana. Definitely one to consider if the second wave of Decca pure analogues whets your appetite but you haven't got the funds. This is one of about 5 London Enterprises that really punch above their weight. I do think this MTT Firecracker is worth looking out for, because I don't think there's much of a chance that Original Source are going to do yet another early 70s era Rite of Spring. Although I quite like this cover, I've got to admit I do regret not having the original DG cover with that big spooky eye on it. Record number 3 is an earlier vintage Deutsche Grammophon recording from 1961. It's Szell and Fournier's celebrated Dvorak's Cello Concerto. This session certainly had some very Karajan-y features, with the Berlin Philharmonic playing at the Jesus Christus Kirche, with Gunther Hermanns at the control and Hans Weber producing. It's the type of concerto performance I really go for, a spirited tussle between orchestra and soloist. There's plenty to enjoy here, especially the glorious cello tone recorded throughout this performance. This celebrated recording has been re-released on multiple occasions after the initial Big Tulip version. This particular version has going for it a really nice lyrical Quentin Williams cut, plus a rather unusual extra added in. The extra is the Moldo section of the Kubelik Boston Smetana Marvelast. So just one part of the Marvelast that was given the Original Source treatment a couple of years ago to a mixed reception. Original Source did provide the definitive explanation in one of their FAQ YouTube videos, how excessive reverb was added to disguise the sonic differences between the early takes that had the room acoustics set to mono by accident, and the later takes which had the room settings correctly in stereo. What really surprised me when I heard this section was that there was no reverb present, just natural sounding stereo and room acoustics. I'm only guessing here, but it sounds like the source tape that was provided by DG to Decca to work from was an earlier one that hadn't had the reverb added to it yet. Probably because it was a single excerpt, so there was no need to hide any sonic differences between tracks. Now with this version, it's obviously stuck on the end of the record, so understandably there is a bit of a loss of dynamics right at the end, but it is a fascinating one to listen to, as this is possibly more representative of the intended sound that the engineers were aiming for, rather than the post-production fix that they ended up having to use. Record number 4 is another vintage reference recording. This one was recorded in 1960 at the Musikverein Vienna. It's the legendary Tchaikovsky Mravinsky Symphony No. 6, where Mravinsky and the Leningrad Philharmonic Orchestra pushed that DG early stereo equipment to its absolute limit at times, with an incredible performance where they played like their lives depended on it. Like the Szell, there have been multiple re-releases over the years, since the original Big Tulip versions. More recently, there have been some fairly pricey reissues of the 3 Mravinsky Tchaikovsky symphonies by Analog Phonic and Speaker's Corner. Rayner made clear that at the moment he's reluctant to take on the Mravinsky Tchaikovsky symphonies, mainly because the hall acoustics were recorded in mono, and some concerns that the original source process may highlight that flaw. This pressing is another bang for buck cut by Mr. X, where there's plenty of passion and power just for a few pounds. Highly recommended. Record number 5 is definitely not one for the Mahler purists, but this selection of Mahler symphonic excerpts cut by Quentin Williams stood out for me as being one of the most transparent cuts I heard when listening to this series. The original DG release of this compilation from Kubelik's Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra Mahler cycle took place in 1971. It was part of a Mahler pile-on by most classical record companies at that time to cash in on the success of Visconti's Death in Venice film with its unforgettable, haunting Mahler soundtrack. Kubelik's RSO Mahler series was all recorded at the Hörsaal Munich between 1968 and 71, mostly by one of my favourite DG engineers, Heinz Wildhagen. The Great Composers re-release is a bit different because they found enough room for an extra track and decided to add in the rather jolly rustic second movement from the First Symphony. It's certainly a wonderful version and totally at odds with the mood of the Visconti soundtrack, but the re-release had a different purpose, a sort of now that's what I call Mahler introduction to the composer. I found side 2 to be a particular triumph. Wildhagen captures the vocals from the songs in the 4th and 5th movements of the Third Symphony with a spine-tingling realism and beauty. So if you fancy luxuriating in some transparent, magical Mahler without the usual investment in time, keep an eye out for this one. Within the Great Composers series, as far as DG titles, I managed to track down 5 Ted Burkett cuts. It's possible that there's more, as there is a little bit of variation in versions as far as which engineers did the pressings. The 6th recorded highlight I've chosen is another Ted Burkett pressing. It's Barenboim conducting the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, recorded at Orchestra Hall in 1977. It's a kind of Russian favourites compilation. The producer and engineer on this recording were the same ones responsible for the earlier Bruckner 4 recorded in 1972, which received a particularly successful original source treatment. By 1977, the recording techniques had changed from 4 to 2-track mixdowns to multi-miking, and the sonics do seem to lose a bit as far as subtlety and sense of depth with these later multi-miking recordings. But there are certainly still plenty of positives to enjoy with this later recording. It's an absolute tour de force performance, providing an exciting firework display of sonics. Of the 4 performances, it's the Russian Easter Overture that's the wildest and most impressive, with Chicago's brass section absolutely crushing it with precision section playing at impressive, breathtaking speed, all played with a real swagger. The sonics are enhanced by a wonderful cut by Burkett, who shows again why he was Decca's go-to guy for cutting lengthy classical sides while retaining impressive dynamics. I certainly admit if I had to make a choice between this record and the classic golden era Kingsway sound Romantic Russia, also cut by Burkett, I would definitely go for the latter, but I still think this pressing is well worth picking up for the blistering Russian Easter and the exuberant fun of this largely forgotten LP. Record number 7 is one of my favourites. It turned out it's a little bit different than the other DG recordings because it wasn't actually made by any of the DG backroom staff. It was made freelance in the UK and then sold on to DG for distribution. It's this magnificent Elgar Enigma variations conducted by Norman Del Mar with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra from 1975. I have to make a confession here. The main reason I actually picked this one up was for the Norman Del Mar picture on the back. But I'm so glad I did, because this version really spoke to me and instantly replaced my previous favourite, which was the Decca Monteur. Del Mar's really sensitive approach is very faithful to Elgar's original intentions and phrasings. And there is a really lovely collaboration going on here between producer Brian Culverhouse, who was an EMI producer from the early days of stereo, who had just recently gone freelance, working alongside a pre-Chandos Brian Cousins as recording engineer. The recording took place in 1975 at Guildford Cathedral, which is a modern, very spacious building. The recording did get a very small release on the Contour label in the UK, and the back cover of this in particular is of interest because it shows a small photograph of the recording session. And you can work out from other photographs of the cathedral that the location that they used is the part of the cathedral called the Crossing, and that the orchestra was situated below some of the organ pipes which come in at the end, and very close to this enormous nave of the cathedral, which is really responsible for some extremely strong acoustic qualities. Recording loud music in a cathedral can be very challenging due to the potential long booming acoustic echoes that take place. I did find out that in my collection I did have one other recording made at Guildford Cathedral, this time by Kenneth Wilkinson, a couple of years before the Enigma Variations recording. Now this one followed the standard Decca approach to heavy echo environments, where they tended to change over from omnidirectional to directional microphones to kind of rein in the amount of echo picked up. And it's a beautiful recording, but really very, very different in nature to the Del Mar Enigma Variations. This Elgar recording instead embraces these occasional giant waves of echo and successfully surfs on them without any wipeouts. The results perfectly complements Enigma Variations, with waves of loud echo occurring at emotional high points of the variations, making the cathedral roar in sympathy. At other times the resonance roars like thunder, and in the finale it sounds almost like cannons going off. I don't think the heavy echo works with the pomp and circumstance marches on the B-side, but it works to perfection with Enigma. This pressing was mastered by Quentin Williams, and it just adds this nice sprinkling of Decca to this wonderful collaboration of EMI talent and Chandos talent. I want to finish this video with some practical advice about condition of this series, just in case any of these titles do appeal to you as budget pressings that do punch above their weight and do have just a little bit more to them than standard DG fare from that period. This unique series also does have a unique Achilles heel due to the original packaging, and I've got a horrible example of this. It's a PVC outer sleeve that all of these records came in. Now the problem is some people opted to keep their records in these sleeves, and now that they are over 40 years old, there are potential problems which are not evident if they are kept in a stable environmental situation. In a stable environment, things are fine, but add in extreme heat and direct sunlight, as I noticed myself after I picked up some vinyl during a heat wave, where during a weekend some of these records had been left near a front window in direct sunlight, that in those circumstances these PVC covers started to gas like crazy. When this is actively happening, you can't miss it, because the PVC starts to smell like some kind of chemical solvent. Fortunately, most of the records got off lightly, but about 3 of them, probably because they were in direct sunlight, were damaged with persistent, very light ticking occurring through pretty much all of the music on both sides. I've got an example of one of the damaged ones, and it is a bit of a shame because I was hoping to compare it directly to the original source version. But on the positive side, there are some red flags which I think are useful to look out for if you do come across some of these records still in their PVC covers. This is one of the things I found, that what I found was that the inner sleeves seemed to be covered with these really strong brown marks excessively, whereas the ones that got off lightly would just have 1 or 2 of these. But another thing I noticed with this really badly damaged one, there was also some smeared staining of the external cover. And it does fit in with the smell being a bit like paint stripper. So if you do see this is a bit of a red flag. If you come across a large collection of these records still in their covers, even without those signs, I would probably recommend just buying a few and trying them out first, just to get a sense of what sort of condition they're actually in. Because the vinyl looks absolutely fine and untouched. So I hope this video has been of use to you, or of interest, because it is a bit of a curious story. I only focused on the DG releases of this series. There actually are 1 or 2, mainly Decca ones, that are of interest too. And those ones may well pop up in the future when discussing Decca records in general. I've got to admit, I don't know when I'll be doing another video, but hopefully I'll be able to pull one together again soon. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.